Did the author omit them intentionally? Or did someone else decide that we could read up to this point and no further? The author makes a promise on the last pages that we know to exist, that certain secrets will soon be revealed. The idea so appeals to our curiosity and imagination that we can safely assume that the dust that has literally been stirred up by this ancient manuscript is unlikely to settle any time soon. The translation from Old English and Dutch has been executed by the inimitable Piet van Vliet himself. Thanks to his smooth conversion into modern language, we feel as though we are being addressed from the distant past by a fellow human being who, with all his quotidian worries and ordinary cares, is more like us than we could ever have thought possible. The resulting document was the inspiration for this novel, in which I have attempted to fill in the gaps of history in a plausible way. I am extraordinarily grateful to Piet van Vliet for choosing this novel as the platform for his manuscript. After all, an article in a historical journal would only be read by a few specialists, but now the information contained in this unique text can be made available to a wider audience. Jeroen Windmeijer. Part 1. The Old World. Leiden. Chapter 1. Peter de Haan gripped the handle of the door that led to the lodge room, as the Freemasons called their meeting place or temple. The open evening at which the lodge's chairman, worshipful Master Koen Zoutman, had told visitors about his lodge, Loge Ishtar, was drawing to a close. After his presentation, guests and lodge members had gathered at the drinks reception in the function room downstairs, while the chairman himself had stayed upstairs in the temple to answer the questions of curious visitors. The event had, after all, been a unique opportunity for outsiders to see inside the Masonic Hall on the Steenschouwer Canal, a building that was usually shrouded in mystery. Peter and his girlfriend Fay Spejamore were ready to leave, but Fay didn't want to go without saying goodbye to Koen. Fay had been a member of Loge Ishtar since its foundation in 2014. As a lodge made up of both male and female Masons, Ishtar was very unusual at a time when Freemasonry was still almost exclusively male and had only recently started to accept female members. A sudden feeling of dread washed over Peter, making him reluctant to push down on the door handle. Fay, who was right behind him and not expecting him to stop, bumped into his back. "What's wrong?" she asked, startled. "I don't know," Peter answered. Then, very slowly, he opened the door. The main lights in the temple had been switched off. A single spotlight blazed in the darkness. Peter and Fay followed the widening ray of light. Suddenly, they both held their breath as though they had just jumped into the freezing water of an ice-cold river together. In front of them, perfectly illuminated on the black and white tiles like a toppled king on a chessboard, lay the body of the worshipful master. Fay let out a scream, then immediately clapped her hand over her mouth to stifle it. Peter ran over to the chairman. His head was surrounded by a pool of blood. On the tiled floor next to him was a gavel, bloody and covered in hair. Sticking out of his chest was a set square that looked like it had been put there with tremendous force. But strangest of all was the pair of compasses that had been stabbed through his clasped hands. Although he knew it was pointless, Peter pressed the index and middle finger of his right hand to the man's neck. There was no sign of life. Peter turned to Fay, who stood motionless in the doorway, her eyes wide and her hand still pressed over her mouth. In a daze, he shook his head, then stood up and took his phone out of his pocket to call 112. Do I ask for the police or an ambulance, he thought. He keyed in 112 and the screen lit up. The call was answered on the first ring. Do you require police, fire or ambulance? The voice was friendly but slightly brusque. Police, said Peter. In Leiden. He was transferred immediately. Leiden police, said a female voice a few seconds later. What's your emergency? He hesitated for a moment and then said, Hello, this is Peter de Haan. Someone has been murdered.